She was 84 years old. She could barely walk. And someone planned her abduction for weeks before they took her. Here's what makes this case unlike anything investigators in Arizona have ever seen. The man who came for Nancy Guthrie didn't rush. He didn't panic. He didn't make mistakes in the way criminals usually do. He came prepared. He came masked. He came armed. And when he was finished, he vanished so completely that over 100 days later, with the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, a combined reward pool of over $1.2 million, and the weight of an entire nation watching, not a single arrest has been made. But that may be about to change. Because there is a strand of DNA. There is blood that tells a story. There is surveillance footage that reveals a man who thought he'd covered every track, and one that he didn't. Stay with me. Because before this video is over, you are going to understand why investigators are quietly, carefully, and with gritted teeth, saying the word breakthrough. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. We cover true crime stories like this one, cases that keep you up at night, cases that deserve more eyes, more attention, and more pressure on the people who have answers but aren't talking. Drop a like on this video. It helps more people find this story. And we genuinely want to know. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We have viewers from Las Vegas to London, from Phoenix to Perth, and every single one of you matters to this community. We are on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers. If this story moves you, if it disturbs you the way it should, share it. One share could be the thing that breaks this case open, because you never know who is watching. In this video, we are going to walk you through everything. The night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The blood on the porch. The masked man on the doorbell camera. The ransom notes and the deadlines that came and went in silence. The DNA evidence currently sitting in an FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. The cracks forming in the investigation. And the reason, the one quiet reason, that investigators believe they are finally closing in. Do not click away. Do not skip ahead. This story is told in layers, and you need every single one of them to understand what truly happened. Let's start at the beginning. January 31st, 2026. Tucson, Arizona. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood sits north of the city, pressed up against the Santa Catalina Mountains. It is one of those places where the houses are large and the streets are quiet and the neighbors all know each other by first name. The kind of neighborhood where people don't lock their doors until late. The kind of place where you feel safe. That is exactly why he chose it. At 9:48 p.m., Nancy Guthrie was dropped off at her home by family members after dinner. She walked to her front door. She went inside. She was 84 years old, frail, and in what her daughter would later describe as tremendous pain, a woman whose body was failing her in ways that made even walking difficult. She could not wander off. She could not simply disappear. She could not have left on her own. Her family knew that. And they made that very clear from day one. The next morning, February 1st, Nancy didn't show up. She had plans, a church service she watched online with a friend, a quiet ritual that was part of her weekly routine. When she didn't appear, her friend reached out. The family was contacted. And somewhere around noon, someone made the call that no family ever wants to make. Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. What investigators found when they arrived at her home stopped them cold. On the front porch, her front porch, where she had stood just hours before, where her family had watched her walk inside, there were drops of blood. Her blood. And this is where things take a dark turn. Because those drops of blood weren't random. They weren't the kind of blood you'd see from an accident or a fall. Forensic analysts who reviewed the evidence described it as a pattern. A story written in red on a concrete porch in the Arizona night. A retired FBI agent who spoke publicly about the case used a specific phrase that should send chills down your spine. He called it a last stand. An 84-year-old woman, barely able to walk, in tremendous pain, facing a masked man with a firearm, and she fought back. Let that sit with you for a moment. She fought back. The blood on that porch was proof that Nancy Guthrie did not go quietly. She resisted. She struggled. And somewhere in that struggle, her attacker made his first mistake. He bled too. The DNA recovered from the scene was described by investigators as mixed. That means more than one person's genetic material was present. Nancy's blood was there. But so was something else. Something that didn't belong to her. Something that, right now, at this very moment, is being analyzed by some of the most advanced forensic scientists in the world at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. We'll come back to that. Because what that DNA represents is the thread that could unravel everything. But first, you need to understand who was watching before that night even happened. Because here's the detail that no one is talking about loudly enough. Surveillance footage reviewed by investigators revealed that the suspect was not a stranger who stumbled upon an opportunity. He had been there before. He had been watching. Sources familiar with the investigation told ABC News that the masked suspect appears to have visited Nancy Guthrie's front door earlier than the night of February 1st. He scouted her. He studied her routine. He knew when she came home. He knew when she was alone. He may have known about her physical limitations, that she couldn't run, couldn't fight back effectively, couldn't scream loud enough for neighbors to hear. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a planned abduction. Carefully constructed. Deliberately executed. And targeted specifically at one woman, in one house, in one quiet neighborhood, because of who she was connected to. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. One of the most recognizable faces on American morning television. A woman whose name, whose salary, whose life is very much in the public domain. And someone used that information to make a plan. What happened next shocked everyone. Within days of the disappearance, ransom notes began to arrive. Not one. Multiple. They went to TMZ. To local Tucson television news stations. And they contained something that made investigators stop breathing for a moment. Details that, according to a KOLD anchor who reviewed one of the notes, only someone who was holding her for ransom would know. Sensitive information. Specific information. Things that were present when she was taken. The notes demanded money. They demanded it in cryptocurrency, untraceable, borderless, designed specifically to vanish into the digital ether. And they came with deadlines. February 9th. The first deadline. February 9th came. And went. No proof of life. No contact. Silence. A second deadline passed in the same suffocating quiet. The Guthrie family, in one of the most devastating public moments of the entire ordeal, released a video on February 4th. Savannah Guthrie stood alongside her brother and sister and spoke directly to whoever had taken their mother. We too have heard the reports about a ransom letter in the media. Her voice was steady, but her eyes told a different story. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you and we are ready to listen. And then she turned to the camera and she spoke to her mother. Everyone is looking for you, Mommy, everywhere. There are few things in this world that will stop you in your tracks quite like watching a grown woman, a professional, a woman who has sat across from presidents and delivered breaking news with composure. Break. She broke. Because no matter how many cameras you've faced, nothing prepares you for this. But here's what made investigators deeply uneasy about those ransom notes. The FBI, after reviewing all of them, concluded that most were not legitimate. Opportunists. People who had read the news and decided to exploit a family's grief for profit. It happens in high-profile cases. It is sickening and it is real. But Savannah Guthrie told a different story in her first public interview since her mother's disappearance. She said she believed 2 of the notes were real. 2 specific notes. Notes that she and her family responded to. Notes that, in her words, she tended to believe. Think about what that means. It means that at some point, the family of Nancy Guthrie was in communication, or attempting to be in communication, with the person who took her. It means there was a thread, however thin, connecting them to whoever had their mother. And then that thread went silent. But that's not even the worst part. On February 10th, the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department released the doorbell camera footage to the public. And the nation saw him for the first time. 5 feet 9 inches tall. Average build. Black ski mask covering every inch of his face. Armed. And carrying what court documents later described as a 25-liter backpack. He was not someone who had arrived to knock and run. He had come prepared to stay. Prepared to take someone. FBI Director Kash Patel personally posted about the footage, describing an armed individual appearing to have tampered with the camera at Nancy Guthrie's front door the morning of her disappearance. He tampered with the camera. He tried to destroy the evidence of his own presence. But the footage had already been captured. Already saved. Already preserved in a way he couldn't undo. That same day, investigators followed a lead 60 miles south of Tucson, to a town called Rio Rico, right near the Arizona border with Mexico. They searched a home. They took a man into custody for questioning. He was released. No charges. No arrests. The lead went cold. But the footage remained. And the footage showed something else. Something that didn't make the headlines the way it should have. The suspect had tampered with the camera before entering the property. He knew it was there. He planned for it. He worked around it. And yet he still left DNA behind. Now, let's talk about the investigation itself. Because this is where another layer of this story emerges. A layer that is uncomfortable, frustrating, and in some ways, almost as disturbing as the crime itself. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has been the public face of this investigation from day one. And from day one, he has been under fire. Former FBI special agents have publicly questioned the way the case was managed. FBI Director Kash Patel made the extraordinary statement that federal agencies were not given enough operational flexibility early in the investigation. That is not the kind of language federal officials use casually. That is a very specific, very deliberate phrase that signals something went wrong in the early days, days that are often the most critical in any abduction case. There were reports that the sheriff's office initially sent DNA evidence, including a hair sample recovered from inside the home, to a private laboratory in Florida. A private lab. Not the FBI. Not Quantico. A private facility in Florida that spent 11 weeks working on the sample before finally transferring it to the FBI for more advanced analysis. 11 weeks. In a missing person case, where every day without answers is another day further from the truth. Forensic experts who reviewed the timeline publicly asked the question that the family was almost certainly asking in private. Why wasn't this sent to the FBI immediately? Why did it take 11 weeks and a transfer decision to get the most sophisticated forensic technology in the world working on this evidence? There are no clean answers to that question. And the sheriff has not offered any. What happened next shocked the family in a different way. Sheriff Nanos told People magazine that he was no longer directly communicating with the Guthrie family. That the FBI was now the primary point of contact between investigators and Savannah Guthrie and her siblings. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer appeared on national television and asked the question plainly. "I wonder who cut off the communication. Was it the family or was it him?" Because there is a difference. There is a vast and meaningful difference between a law enforcement official who steps aside to let the more capable federal agency take the lead, and one who stops talking to a family because the relationship has become strained. And according to multiple sources, by the time 100 days had passed since Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, that relationship was fractured. The family wanted answers they weren't getting. The sheriff's office insisted the investigation was progressing. John Ramsey, the father of JonBenet Ramsey, a man who spent years living inside the specific nightmare of a high-profile unsolved case, reached out publicly. He gave the family advice that only he could give: be aggressive. Do not sit back and wait. Families cannot remain passive during investigations involving loved ones. He knows. He knows exactly what happens when they do. But here's what investigators aren't saying publicly, and what experts say the silence actually means. 100 days in this kind of case is not a failure. It doesn't feel that way. It doesn't look that way from the outside. But in investigative terms, 100 days of methodical, painstaking forensic analysis is not a cold case. It is a building case. Former law enforcement officials who have worked missing child cases, violent crime investigations, and hostage situations repeated the same thing across dozens of interviews. The cameras move on. The investigators do not. Behind the scenes, in the 100 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her porch in the Catalina foothills, investigators have re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined old tips with fresh eyes, cataloged thousands of surveillance videos from neighborhood cameras, traffic cameras, doorbell cameras across the area. They have been running down digital breadcrumbs that the public will never hear about. Because here's the thing about a man who plans an abduction this carefully: he also drives a car. He also has a phone. He also, at some point in the weeks before February 1st, drove through a neighborhood that had cameras. Bought something. Searched something. Told someone. Sophisticated criminals make sophisticated plans. But they are still human. And humans leave traces. Now, here is where the story shifts. Here is where we get to the word that investigators have started, carefully and cautiously, allowing into their statements. Breakthrough. It started with the DNA. The hair sample recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the one sent to the private lab in Florida, the one eventually transferred to the FBI, arrived at the Quantico laboratory with a question attached to it. Whose hair is this? If it belongs to the intruder, if the man who came through that door in the dead of night, masked and armed and prepared, shed a single hair in the process, then that hair contains his identity, his full genetic profile, his ancestral history, his relatives, his name. That is not a metaphor. That is how forensic genealogy works. The same science that cracked the Golden State Killer case after decades of dead ends. The same science that has contributed to breakthroughs in more than 500 violent crime cases across the United States since advanced family tree matching became widely adopted. You don't need to know who someone is to find them. You need their DNA. And a database. And time. And the lab is still working. Sheriff Nanos said it himself, in as plain language as he's used throughout this entire investigation. We have DNA that is unknown, who the contributor or depositor is. but I think they're getting closer to finding out who that was." And then he said something that should make you lean forward in your seat. "When the labs tell us, hey, there's nothing else we can do, well, then maybe we've got a problem. But right now, the labs aren't telling us that." Read that again. The labs are not giving up. The labs believe there is still something to find. The science is still working. And if that hair belongs to the person who took Nancy Guthrie, when the lab returns with a name, investigators will not simply knock on a door. They will have spent these 100+ days building a case strong enough to put someone away. Because Sheriff Nanos made this clear too. We're being careful not to rush to conclusions. They want a conviction, not just an arrest. And then there are the gloves. On February 15th, investigators recovered a pair of gloves from a location approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. The gloves resembled the pair worn by the masked man in the doorbell camera footage. A DNA sample was obtained from those gloves. 2 miles away. Discarded, as if dropped during a retreat. As if the person who wore them thought that putting distance between themselves and the crime scene meant putting distance between themselves and the evidence. It doesn't work that way. DNA doesn't respect distance. It doesn't care how far you run. There are now multiple pieces of biological evidence in this case. The mixed DNA from inside the home. The unidentified hair. The gloves 2 miles from the scene. And investigators are running comparisons, cross-referencing, building a picture of a person, their biology, their genetic footprint, their identity, from the traces they left behind. A former FBI agent who reviewed the public details of the case said it plainly. If it is a hair from the offender, then it will lead to his identification. They will have his name. They will have his name. But that's not even the worst part. Because there is a question hanging over this case that has never been fully addressed publicly. A question that sits in the silence between every press conference and every carefully worded update. Where is Nancy Guthrie? She is 84 years old. She was in tremendous pain before she was taken. She was frail. She was barely able to walk. Investigators, when asked directly, have said the case is being treated as a likely homicide, even though her body has never been found. Some experts, appearing on national television in the weeks following her disappearance, said it was unlikely she was still alive. They did not say it cruelly. They said it honestly. Because the truth of this case, the cold, clinical truth, is that an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility, in chronic pain, taken against her will in the dead of night by a masked man with a gun, faces terrible odds. But the family has never stopped saying the opposite. Savannah Guthrie, on February 9th, posted to Instagram, "We believe our mom is still out there." She was not performing hope. She was insisting on it. She was holding on to it the way a daughter holds on to the sound of her mother's voice when the alternative is too dark to look at directly. And somewhere in the middle of those two truths, the expert assessment and a daughter's belief, is the woman herself. Nancy Guthrie. Somewhere. We need to talk about what Savannah Guthrie said in her first interview. Because it may be the most haunting thing to come out of this entire case. She was asked whether she thought her mother had been targeted because of her. Because of her fame. Because of her face on American television every morning, 5 days a week. And she didn't deflect. She didn't say, "I don't want to speculate." She said what she actually felt. To think that I brought this to her bedside. That it's because of me. She paused. I just say, "I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm so sorry." Think about what it means to carry that. To wake up every morning and anchor a national news program and smile at the camera and conduct interviews, while carrying the possibility that the life you built, the career you worked for, the name you made, was the reason someone came for your mother. That is not a burden anyone should have to carry. And it is the reason this case matters beyond the headlines, beyond the DNA and the doorbell camera and the cryptocurrency demands. It matters because it raises a question that is becoming increasingly urgent in a world where celebrity and danger intersect in ways we haven't fully reckoned with yet. Who is watching? Not the good kind of watching. Not fans. Not viewers. The other kind. The kind that studies a public figure's schedule, learns where their family lives, calculates what they're worth, and decides that vulnerability is an opportunity. That kind of watching. And this is where things take a dark turn, again. Because the motive, according to Sheriff Nanos and the investigators who have allowed small details to surface, appears to have been financial. This was not a stranger with a grudge. This was not a random act of violence. This was, at its core, a transaction. A kidnapping for profit. Someone who looked at Savannah Guthrie's salary, her network deal, her public profile, and decided her mother's life was worth a ransom. And that is a specific kind of evil. Calculated evil. The kind that doesn't lose control. The kind that doesn't leave obvious traces. The kind that plans and scouts and waits and acts with precision. But it is also the kind of evil that wants something. And wanting something means making contact. And making contact means leaving a trail. The ransom notes exist. The cryptocurrency demands exist. The IP address that Kolb's news anchor mentioned, the address that a detective asked about almost immediately, that exists too. Digital evidence, like biological evidence, has a way of surviving, of persisting, of waiting. And investigators have thousands of pieces of it. Here's where we are today. Over 100 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in the Catalina foothills on a January night that the neighborhood will never forget. The combined reward pool stands at more than $1.2 million. The Guthrie family's personal reward, $1 million. The FBI, $50,000. The full community, watching, waiting, calling tips into the 88 crime tip line at 520-882-7463. The FBI is now the primary point of contact with the family. The DNA evidence is at Quantico. The hair sample is being analyzed. The gloves are in evidence. The thousands of surveillance videos are being processed frame by frame. And somewhere in a laboratory in Virginia, a team of forensic scientists is looking at a strand of genetic material, possibly from the man who came for Nancy Guthrie, and building a profile. A picture. A name. Sheriff Nanos, despite all the criticism, despite all the pressure, despite all the questions about why the FBI wasn't given more access earlier and why the DNA went to Florida first and why he stopped talking directly to the family, has said one thing consistently. My team, I've said all along, they're gonna solve this. I fully 100% believe that. Whether you trust him or not depends on what you've seen these last 100 days. But the DNA doesn't care about politics. The DNA doesn't care about press conferences or public perception. The DNA just tells the truth. Let's slow down for a moment. Because I want you to really think about what happened on that porch. An 84-year-old woman came home from dinner with her family. She walked inside. She was tired, probably. In pain, certainly. Looking forward to rest, to quiet, to the simple comfort of her own home on a January night in Arizona. And somewhere in the hours that followed, after her family's headlights had disappeared down the street, after the neighborhood had settled into its nighttime silence, after the darkness had fully arrived, a man in a black ski mask came to her door. He had been there before. He had planned for this. He had tampered with her camera. He was armed. And she fought him. On that porch. In the dark. With whatever she had. She fought. The blood that investigators found tells the story of a woman who did not simply give up, who did not surrender to the terror of what was happening to her, who was not passive in the face of violence. I think about that a lot. I think about what that took. I think about the kind of woman who, at 84, in pain, facing a masked man with a gun, still decides to resist. That is who Nancy Guthrie is. Not the missing person on a news ticker. Not the elderly mother of a TV anchor. Not a case number. A woman who fought back. And the evidence of that fight is sitting in a laboratory right now, waiting to give her the justice she deserves. There is one more thing. In cases like this, high-profile, complex, emotionally charged, politically contested cases, there is always a moment. A pivot. The case shifts. Something that seemed frozen begins to move. Investigators who have worked cases like this say that moment almost always comes from the same place. The one piece of evidence the perpetrator didn't account for. The one thing they didn't plan for. The single variable in an otherwise controlled plan that comes undone. It might be the hair. It might be the gloves. It might be a surveillance camera on a street 3 miles away that no one knew existed, capturing a license plate at 11:47 p.m. on January 31st. It might be a phone that pinged a cell tower. It might be a tip from someone who knows something. Someone who saw something. Someone who has been sitting with information that feels too heavy to carry and too dangerous to share, but who is watching this video right now and thinking about whether the time has finally come to pick up the phone. If that person is you, call. The tip line is 520-882-7463. The reward is over $1 million. And more importantly, somewhere out there is a woman who fought back, who deserves to be found, who deserves to have the truth told. This is not over. That is the thing about this case that keeps investigators going, that keeps the family believing, that keeps people like us making videos like this one. It is not over. The DNA is real. The evidence is real. The science does not lie, and it does not give up. And neither do the people who loved Nancy Guthrie. Somewhere in Tucson, in Quantico, in a sheriff's briefing room and an FBI field office in Phoenix, people are working. Quietly. Methodically. Building something. And when they're ready, when the case is airtight, when the name is confirmed, when the evidence is irrefutable, there will be a knock on a door. And the man in the black ski mask is going to find out what it feels like when justice comes for you. Until that day, we keep telling the story. We keep the pressure on. We keep saying her name. Nancy Guthrie. If you've made it to the end of this video, you already know why this case matters. Share it. Every view, every share, every comment keeps this story alive and keeps pressure on the people with the power to find answers. Subscribe to this channel if you want to be the first to know when there is a new development in this case. And there will be one. When that DNA comes back. When an arrest is made. When the truth finally surfaces, we will be here, and we will cover it with everything we have. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you think. Tell us if you have information. And if you have a tip, call 520-882-7463. We are on a journey to 1,000 subscribers. If this story moved you, if it disturbed you the way it should, hit subscribe right now and bring one more person with you. This community is growing because of stories that matter. Because of real people who deserve real answers. Nancy Guthrie deserves real answers. Don't forget her.